You're listening to People in Profit, a podcast that focuses on elevating humanity through business, sponsored by Conscious Capitalism Arizona. And now, let's hear from our hosts, Jeremy and Sarah.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the People in Profit podcast brought to you by Conscious Capitalism Arizona. I am Jeremy Neis, here with Debbie Accomazzo, your hosts, and we are excited for today's discussion with Mary Henry of AZ Talent Co-op and Ron Price of Price Associates. Before we dive into the conversation, for those of you who may be new to conscious capitalism, free enterprise capitalism has served to lift more people out of poverty than any other social economic system ever conceived, empowering social cooperation, human progress, and elevating humanity. And it can inspire to even more. Good business is the answer to many of the global issues humankind is facing, and that is what we'll dive into on the show. Conscious capitalism is a global movement with over 50 chapters across the world that is on a mission to recapture the truth that good business is about doing good for all stakeholders and creating a higher purpose for your organization that can benefit everyone. Our Arizona chapter is focused on highlighting the amazing businesses and leaders in our own state who are pursuing a higher purpose and consciously creating value for all of their stakeholders. If you would like to find out more about conscious capitalism and the Arizona chapter, please visit ccarizona.org. All right, so with the formalities out of the way, let's get into some fun stuff. Debbie, would you be so kind to share a little bit with the listeners about who's in studio?
I would be happy to. First, we have Mary Henry, a human resources consultant and recognized leader in change management, people development, and organization assessment, focusing on adding bottom line value to organizations through people, process, and profit. Each of those are capitalized, so I think we're going to hear more about that. Her stellar leadership background with Fortune 50 companies in the retail space has been instrumental in her being sought after for organization change assignments. As a senior human resources leader with CVS, Mary was selected as the HR partner aligned with the business in multiple acquisitions. During these lengthy assignments, she used the Cotter change model to effectively integrate the acquired companies into the CVS organization and culture with detailed approaches, tools, and strategies. We look forward to hearing more, Mary. And with us virtually is Mr. Ron Price of Price Associates, founder, president, and CEO. In today's lovely surprise, I might add. Ron is an internationally recognized business advisor, executive coach, speaker, and author. Known for his creative and systematic thinking, business versatility, and practical optimism, Ron has worked in 15 countries and served in almost every level of executive management over the past 40 years. As the former CEO of a multi-million-dollar international company, Ron understands the challenges and risks of running a business and building a dynamic team. He works shoulder to shoulder with executive leadership teams to bring strategic clarity and transformational results to organizations, especially those dealing with turmoil and transition. In 2004, Ron started Price Associates, a global leadership performance firm that features the bright minds and innovative solutions of some of the world's top consultants in organizational development, process management, branding, marketing, and more. And it is Price Associates, not Price and Associates, which Ron made very clear just a few moments ago. Tell us why that is, Ron.
Thank you very much, first of all, because 17, 18 years later, I still get introduced at events as Price and Associates. When we talked about what our name was going to be, I was very resistant to having my name attached to it. But our brand consultants said that when you have a person's name, it creates more of an emotional connection with people. And I finally acquiesced by saying, I will accept it if it's Price Associates with the emphasis on associates, and that we never put and between those two words. Because what I really love is the people that are a part of our team and the wonderful job that they do, helping organizations grow, helping people discover and pursue their greatest potential.
That's fantastic, Ron. And you've been fighting to remove that and ever since. We are cheering for you to continue to do so.
Thank you. If I knew today what I knew then, I would have not accepted this title.
You're definitely in the right room.
That's right. Speaking of being in the right room, this is, I look forward to every conversation that we have here, but the format of folks is particularly of intrigue because not only are you leading organizations that are very much cut from the cloth of conscious capitalism, from my estimations, but you also are advising and helping other organizations do so. So the richness of what you've seen and are out there in the trenches with every day just makes for great conversation and enlightenment for those that are listening to this podcast and are nibbling around the edges of what is this conscious capitalism? What does it mean? How does it help? You two are both very well positioned for that. And given that we have a whole hour, Mary, would you mind sharing a little bit about your background and what led you to this chair that you're in right now and this passion that you're pursuing every day?
I started my career in retail and retail human resources. I left probably corporate America probably 10 or 15 years ago. I had children that needed someone at home. And so I started a journey on my own. I spent a number of years doing outsourced human resources before it was cool, for about 12 years. I don't recommend that you start a consultancy in the middle of the Great Recession. That was not great timing. Also became involved with the human resource associations, the people associations in Arizona. And all of us came together and said, we all are in the people space, whether it's organizational development, coaching, training and development, all of those different disciplines. What could we do together that we can't do alone? And so over the last 4 years, that's evolved. And a couple of years ago, we said, where do we intersect? What's the most important? What's going to bring about transformational change? And unanimously, we all said, creating inclusive workplaces and taking the DE&J very seriously. So we've spent the last couple of years examining what diversity, equity, and inclusion looks like from beginning to end. There will be no end. With any luck at all, this will continue to be a journey and a continuous improvement journey.
Sure.
So that's what leads me here today.
That's exciting. This is the co-op that we're speaking of right now?
Yes.
Could you share a little bit more about who some of those organizations are that are affiliated with that and sort of what a day in the life looks like?
Absolutely. There's the Arizona Human Resource Executive Forum. They are a group of senior HR leaders. The International Coaching Federation, the Arizona founding chapter. The National Association of African American HR folks, professionals, the ATD, talent development folks. They are a national organization as well. The OD network, there is a local chapter of the Arizona chapter of the OD network. And I know I'm forgetting someone, and AZ BizLink with Lindsay Mullenbrand. Lindsay is, we co-collaborate whenever possible. And right now, I apologize if I've forgotten someone.
That's on us. We put you on the spot. So when you guys huddle up, what kind of things are you tackling, and how do you take to the streets?
It really is driven by the members and the members of the people associations and what they're faced with on a day-to-day basis within their organizations. There's this pandemic going on that seems to be consuming a lot of people's time right now. But it's also keeping your eye on the fact that you need to continue your journey along diversity, equity, and inclusion, inclusive workplaces. There is, no, this is not a shock to anyone either. There is a talent acquisition challenge, and that's putting it nicely. People are calling it the Great Resignation, and there are people who are leaving their jobs in droves, and we need to figure out why that is. So we spend a lot of our time on those conversations around why are people leaving? How do we change the culture, the environment? I know my friend Brian Moore was here earlier talking about culture, but how do we make sure that we have great places to work and inclusive places to work? So that's how we spend our time.
Exciting. All right. Well, we'll peel back more on that. Let's give Ron a shot too. Would you be so kind to kind of tell us, you don't have to give us the play-by-play of every year you've been working, but just give us a little rundown on your journey and what brings you to this initiative that you're part of now.
Sure, Jeremy. I think the most important part for me was that my introduction to business was with my dad.
Cool.
My dad he started a business the year I was born in 1953. So that tells you that I'm ancient now. And I later joined that business with him as a co-owner. And my dad was an entrepreneur his whole life, but he was not an entrepreneur who was driven around making money. He was an entrepreneur who was driven around living his values. And he taught me that work is about connecting with people and serving people. And whether they were an employee or a customer or the member of the associations, our business was truck tire retreading. So we were active members of the American Trucking Association. He taught me that when I had to go out, I grew up in Michigan, and he taught me that when I had to go out on the highway in the middle of the night and change truck tires on the side of the highway with cars going by and splashing mud and ice on me, that was an opportunity for me to live my values. And my career, when I look back on it, really blossomed out of the example that he set for me, that business really is noble. And yes, you have to turn a profit. That's an important part of it because that's how you take care of people. It's how you reward those who helped you succeed. But the lasting thing, the thing that you care about when you get to the end of your life is, did you serve people?
Absolutely. Now, did those messages resonate for you immediately, or have those been, Dad was onto something, Dad was right, as you progressed through the years?
As I've matured, I've come to realize that some of this stuff just gets put into our genes. It's part of our DNA. And some of it we learn from our experiences. So I think what I would say, Jeremy, is I've become more conscious of it over the years. It was always there, but I didn't always recognize it.
Sure.
But if conscious capitalism existed back in 1953 as an organization, my dad would have been one of its greatest proponents.
Would have been right there. That's so cool.
Yeah. And I think we hear that a lot with conscious capitalism, that many who are introduced to the tenets of conscious capitalism recognize that they were perhaps practicing them
Innately,
unconsciously.
Correct. Yep. The unconscious conscious capitalist we like to share.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Okay, so you got your roots with your father. Where did things steer you toward to ultimately arrive at Price Associates?
Well, you told me not to tell the whole story, so
I meant
really
the play-by-play, but you can cover decades. That's okay.
But let's move 12 or 13 chapters in.
Fair enough.
And I had the opportunity to take a company that was in North America and had about 35 employees and grow it internationally into 8 different countries with a heavy emphasis in Asia and the Pacific Rim. And it was such a wonderful experience, so many different ways. But one of the big ways was the opportunity to be exposed to different cultures and to ask the question, could we live those values in different cultures? And at the beginning, a lot of people would think we couldn't because it was a little bit counterintuitive to the way a lot of these cultures operate. I think probably our listeners understand, I hope they do, that America is the most giving country in the world. And the level of volunteerism, the level of community service that exists in America is really unmatched anywhere else in the world. So when I go into these countries that don't have that kind of a culture in the fabric of their people, the question was, could we do conscious capitalism there? Could it work? And we had to earn their respect. We had to prove to them, first of all, that we were serious and genuine, and it wasn't just phony facade in order to get business. And then we had to demonstrate that it could be successful in this different kind of environment. So it was a wonderful journey. I was with that company for 11 years. In 2000, I got up one morning. 2000 was sort of a pivotal point.
Time of change.
Sort of like right now, we call it the Great Resignation. I think of it as the Great Reshuffling that we're going through right now. But 2000, I got up one morning and said, you know what? I think I'm done here. So I went to the board of directors and said, I don't know what I'm going to do next, but I think it's time for me to do something different. I've really loved this. I've enjoyed it. I'll give you 6 months to find my replacement. And I took a year off my oldest son was living and working in China at that time. So I went over to China and did a bunch of backpacking with him. And then I came back and thought, well, what am I really passionate about? What do I love? And I realized I wanted to help leaders. I wanted to help leaders become better leaders. I wanted to help them not just have a title and status, but I wanted them to continue to develop their character. I don't think character is something we're born with. I think it's something that we grow, and we have to keep investing in it. What's the saying? You build it for a lifetime and you can lose it in 5 minutes. So I want to help leaders be motivated, be inspired, be passionate about continuing to deepen and broaden their character. And that's really what motivated me to start Price Associates. And we've been so fortunate along the way to be able to serve a lot of great leaders.
That's outstanding. Thanks for sharing that, Ron.
Well, and I kind of wanted to go back to Mary, picking up on what you had mentioned, Ron, and your father, I'm sure leading by example, but also teaching you from his just driven by living his values in his work and in just his day-to-day life. The first thing I noticed in your bio was that people, process, and profit, Mary. So I wanted to go back to that a little bit because I noticed that your first P was people. And your second P wasn't profit yet. It was process. And that third P was profit. So can you talk a little bit about why they're in that order and where that emphasis on people is and why?
Sure. I've been doing some research around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how to bring it into organizations and how to make it sustainable. And so I thought, I was telling Brian earlier, I thought I was onto something that, you know what, there are a lot of similar tenets to Agile in how to make DE&I inclusive workplaces to make them sustainable. Come to find out that I'm late to the party. There's already someone else who's discovered that there are a lot of similarities. But even in a process like Agile, I consider Agile a bit of a process, but also a thought. It starts with people. It's all about relationships, and you have to build those relationships in order to make those relationships sustainable within organizations. It's helpful to have processes. The processes are the things that make the end result much easier. And if you do the people part right, and you do you follow processes and you make it easy to do the work, then the profit will come. And I lost my train of thought.
That happens. Well, we like to say that the profit is what makes the engine go. So it's just the fuel that keeps your purpose and the passion that you're bringing to the marketplace afloat. So that makes perfect sense.
And one of the things that I believe is, if you look at a profit and loss statement, the profit and loss statement is a rearview mirror. That's those are the things that you did, and those are the results of what you did in the past. It's not a looking forward. So, in a lot of cases, profit is the end result of all those other things and people and the processes that you put in place.
Well, and people are the foundation, I think, is where we're all starting. The foundation of the business, the foundation of the process, the foundation of the profit, the foundation of the values. It all starts with the people, as do the tenets of conscious capitalism, which is what brings us here today. I wanted to have you clarify, and it might just be me. I'm trying to keep track of the acronyms and make sure that I'm understanding. You mentioned dei&J. Explain to me what J is. I think I know what it is, but I want to make sure I get it right. And second part of that question is, it sounds to me like your emphasis and that of the co-op began focusing on those initiatives several years ago, meaning you were a little bit perhaps ahead of the curve as to where we are today with such an intense focus on those initiatives. So two-part question. I want to make sure that we understand DEI-J.
Yes. Diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. One of our board members said that it has to be. She said in another way to express it would also be, fairness and justice. So that's where the dei&J comes from. And the second part of your question was,
it feels like your co-op was a little bit ahead of the curve in tackling diversity, equality, inclusion, and justice, as opposed to what our social discourse has been over the last 18 plus months. It feels like perhaps you got a jump start on the importance of bringing that into the conversation.
Yes, we have been having this conversation for quite some time. And because we've been having this conversation for several hundred and quite frankly, several thousand years. And it's time to stop having the conversation. Instead of being a thought later, I'm stealing someone else's. But instead of being a thought later, let's start being do leaders. Okay. And as a group of professionals all across the different disciplines in people and in human resources, we should be having that conversation first. It should be top of mind. But that also tells you the type of folks who are involved in these types of associations. They are incredibly in tune to what businesses need to do to make inclusive workplaces in order to level that playing field from an economic standpoint. Everyone deserves the dignity to be able to do what it is that they're passionate about and make a difference in the world.
Absolutely.
Do you have any case studies you can walk us through? So you said, let's be doers. And I love that. So recognizing there's opportunity there, and that is probably near the top of the list for many folks right now as they assess hiring and their approach on this. Any practical advice or, hey, we just went through this exercise with an organization not too long ago, and here's some good takeaways. Any of those sprout thoughts for you?
Yes. There's one gentleman that comes to mind, and he's a dear friend of mine, and he is heading up he is heading up a D&I initiative at the company he is involved with. And I don't have his permission to talk about it, so
we'll just talk about him. That's fine.
We'll talk about him, and I'll tell him about it later.
Names.
Yeah, I'll tell him later. And he, I think he's about 6 or 8 months in, and he's already seeing great change. And the great change has come about because no one came in and said, we are going to do this training program and we're going to do this. It was, who's ready to start this journey? Not everyone's there now. Other people will come along. But he let the people within the organization who had passion. They formed employee resource groups, and they put together a mission and a purpose. And now they're seeing progress in the suggestions that that folks within the employee resource groups have fed back to the managers. These are the things that are making a difference, and they're acting upon them.
So it's as simple as you huddle up the right people inside your shop and give them a voice and say, here's the opportunities to make changes. There was no master playbook that you needed to unveil for them. It was truly just giving them the spark, giving them the space, if you will, to be able to share what was already intuited by some of the folks in the shop.
They helped put some structure around it in order to make sure that it was successful. But work is changing, and I'm a firm believer in the fact that if you put really talented people in a room together, that they will do the right thing.
Yes.
And they will come up with fabulous ideas. So put them in a room, give them space, and let them go.
Mm-hmm. Ron, I was going to ask you, in your leadership training, is diversity, equity, inclusion, are those things that are part of your services, or is that more HR level and you're doing higher or different level of conversations with your leadership training?
I think in today's world, Jeremy, you need to be talking about all of this, because if people are going to lead, they have to think holistically, and they have to think not just about what the organization's goals are, but they need to think about the individuals. I actually feel that diversity, equity, and inclusion training gives an organization a competitive advantage because you're bringing in a broader set of perspectives on life. You're bringing in a broader set of capabilities and experiences that people come from, and you're bringing in a much larger network of relationships when you pay attention to that. So I think it's obviously it's fair, and it's about being a more fair, a more just society. But I think it's also, just like conscious capitalism itself, it's a great advantage when you recognize the power that you can find in diversity.
That makes good sense.
And I agree with you, Ron. Where I was going with the not a formal program is we let people join when they're ready. And instead of what was done in the past is we're going to go through this training program, and everyone will be trained and everyone will understand, and life is good. And that's not how the journey looks. So you're absolutely right. The more focus that you put it on it, but also the more that you let the people within that organization drive it themselves, I think the more successful it is.
Yeah, I think you're right, Mary. And I think that one of the things we know about adult learning is that adults have to discover things. You don't teach them things by rote. They have to interact. They have to experience. They have to discover for themselves, and they own it. And I think that when you talk about letting people be drawn to it and then giving them an avenue or an opportunity to express it, you're always going to outperform when you try to enforce compliance around something. Of course, that's not to say that we don't have to make sure that people understand the laws and that they understand the policies or the rules of fair play with human beings. But that's not where the real energy comes from. The real energy comes from when you engage them and they begin to discover it. I think part of what makes this so powerful is that the more we spend time with people who are different from us, the more we realize we're actually the same. We have very similar interests. There are a lot of things that we share together, and those things that we share together give us a greater respect for each other, and they develop a greater trust, which is the environment in which now we can explore diversity, and instead of it pulling us apart, it enhances, it enriches our experience. So I agree. I guess Mary and I are agreeing with each other a lot today.
Well, I'll tell you, I read somewhere the exact same language we're talking about, but the order of the acronym was different. So it was justice, equity, diversion, inclusion, Jedi, like the Jedi's superpower, right? So it kind of plays nicely to the way you frame
the power
that
of the Force.
That's
yes.
Yeah, we got
Absolutely.
something going on here.
Okay, I have a question for
Please.
Ron. And looking at your bio and looking at it from the executive level, the C-suite, and you have a global client relationship as well as just domestic, working shoulder to shoulder with executive leadership teams to bring strategic clarity, particularly those dealing with turmoil and transition, being the parent of a younger millennial and an older Gen Z. I had to print out my list today just to make sure I got that right.
That's good to do it in code too.
Yes,
so
exactly. And I'll share it if you'd like to see, just so you know where you are. It would be interesting to me from your perspective, because you are dealing with the highest level of leadership. And we can do this one of two ways. Either what is that level of executive either most resistant to or most excited about when it comes to adapting their leadership and their company culture and their overall employee culture when it comes to those generational differences, that social discourse that is affecting our employees that are newer to the workforce? Where do you find that tension and or that ease of bringing in some of these newer components of moving a company forward and keeping their employees happy and settled and healthy and everyone rowing in the same direction, so to speak?
Well, first of all, what a huge question.
Yep. And you've got, let's see, I'm not even going to time you, Ron. And
you
Mary,
won the
please.
coin toss. It was going to be Mary, but the coin toss went your way. So.
And Mary, I would love to know, actually, when Ron breaks that down, maybe from your perspective as far as actually hiring how that's working from that perspective. So yeah, good luck with it, Ron.
Yeah, okay, great. Thank you. Well, first of all, it is a very big question because there's so many different circumstances and so much of leadership is around context. One of the big mistakes we make in teaching leadership is we tend to put it into a vacuum and think of it in a generic way. But to really lead well, context is so, so important. So, for instance, one of our global clients that we work with is the largest supplier of pharmaceuticals for animals in the world. And I've had a chance to work with them in several different countries around the world. They have been very proactive about not only diversity, equity, and inclusion, but they've also been very active in trying to understand what it means to have 4 and sometimes 5 generations all working in the same place. And I've seen tremendous progress with them. Matter of fact, I told you they're the largest company of their kind in the world. They're on the New York Stock Exchange, and their CEO is a woman. And it's a great example of them practicing what they preach, of them really living it. What I find, whether it's a global organization or an organization with 10 people, the key is whether or not the leader or the leaders are still hungry to grow themselves. If they're hungry to grow themselves, they're very open to exploring the different generations, and they love to have conversations with the different generations in the workplace and every other kind of diversity as well, because they have this natural curiosity that keeps them going forward. If the leader or the group of leaders kind of feels like they've arrived and it's like I worked all this time to get what we would call a terminal degree, and that doesn't mean a dime degree or a terminal job. It means you can't go any higher than this.
Right.
And if those people think that is what it's about, getting a title or a position, they're going to have a much more difficult time with different generations because they want everybody to behave according to their set of values. So I'm not actually the expert on this, Sarah. We have one of our members, Jeremy Neis, has written a book about this. He's actually in the middle of another book where he's interviewing leaders who are Gen Zs, or some people call them the iGen. And he's asking them, what are they looking for? What kind of leaders do they respect? And he's sort of going the other way. Instead of going top down age-wise, he's going from the bottom up, trying to understand what their ideas are about leadership. So there's just so much to explore in all of these things that we're talking about today, and especially because it's contextual, it's unique in every situation. But the one common denominator is the hunger to grow. If you've got that, you're going to find your way.
Well, and I love that, being hungry to grow, because that could apply also to the employee perspective as well. I mean, we are only as motivated and productive as I should say, we're only as productive as we are motivated.
For sure.
And so, Mary, would you like to add anything to that from the perspective of those who are acquiring talent, seeking talent, helping others to do the same? Because we're all still seeking out multiple generations and interacting with and employing multiple generations who are incented differently.
Yes. And back to that premise of employee resource groups, one of the advantages of those is that everyone has a voice, and that you and that you're heard. So whether it's whether it's people of color, or whether it's the last thing that we don't talk about is ageism. The fact that once you hit a certain age, it's not quite as easy to acquire a position as it was when you were 20-something, and then all of those generations in between. And there's also research around every other generation is more influenced by their grandparents than they are by their parents, because they don't want to be their parents.
Of course, yes.
But the one, yes, once again, Ron, I'm going to agree with you here.
You're going to find something. We're going to have
fabulous
you guys
panel.
arguing
Fabulous.
vehemently before it's over.
If I'm a proponent of when you're hiring someone, my knockout question is how well that person is willing to learn something new. Do they have the ability to grow? And if they don't, then I start making the grocery list of eggs, bread, milk, butter, because I'm kind of done with the interview. So whether it's, business leaders or those that you are bringing on board, the ability to learn, the ability to grow, and the ability to look at things differently is critical. And they're also the folks who are going to do away with the ageisms and the treating people of color different, treating LGBTQ people differently, eliminating all of these differences. And back to your point of we are more alike than we are different.
Well said.
You had mentioned just a little bit ago employee resource groups. Would you please educate me a little bit more on that? And maybe is there a connection in here? Ron's talking about leadership training, and the first thing that always comes to my mind when I think that is we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, because we should be listening twice as much as we ever speak on anything. And so I'm just curious, is that an avenue? Is it really back to the let's listen to the people that are ready to talk? Is that what the employee resource groups are, or how do they fit in this equation?
Yes. People have really great ideas and are great problem solvers. They don't necessarily need the executives within the company to come up with all the answers. What they do need from leaders is the ability to feed that information to them and how it will impact and how it will change the organization, and for them to listen and to react to those kinds of things. So employee resource groups aren't necessarily new. I think at one point, the companies had affinity groups. If you had a bowling team or a volleyball team, then that was kind of an affinity group. Employee resource groups are much more, I don't want to say they're formalized, but they're much more structured, and they come together with a common cause. And a lot of times that common cause is created within that group and not necessarily from higher up. So it's an example of information flowing up as well as not the traditional way of information only flowing down. And I think Ron would probably agree that as organizations tend to flatten and, the hierarchical command and control, that some would argue it didn't work before, and it sure isn't working with these folks in the having a Gen Z at your house. It doesn't work. It really doesn't. You're right. Giving them the ability to have a say in how that all comes out.
And the employee groups are within the enterprise, or is it my firm speaking with other firms and we're learning from one another, all the above?
Oh, I like that.
No charge for good ideas.
I was going to say all credit to the first time, and
then after that,
it's
fair
mine.
enough. I'll take what you got.
Typically, right now they're internal.
Okay.
They're within they're within the CVSs and the Blue Cross and Blue Shields and the Freeport McMorans. They're within those companies themselves. They're a band of employees who have a common mission for their company, but we may have to explore that.
That could work.
Cross
Best
industry.
practices.
Absolutely.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah, Jeremy, and we wrote a book called Growing Influence, the story of how to lead with character, expertise, and impact. And in that book, which is a business fable, we talk about building virtuous conspiracies inside your organization.
All right.
And a virtuous conspiracy is where you have people who have a similar interest and similar values who say, we don't need this to be hierarchical. We don't need this to be driven by the management. We can do this ourselves. So it's a great example of the energy and the life behind an employee resource group. It has so much more potential than when it's an edict or when it's
pushed.
Overly structured from above. So
Makes perfect
once
sense.
again, Mary and I are in agreement.
Here we go. We're going to find it. We're going to find it. Yeah, we don't need to have a title to be a leader, right? You just need to have the passion and the interest and the will to drive forward with it.
Right.
Right.
So in the ever-changing landscape of business, Ron, what is the hot topics right now as you're advancing leadership services to people? Who's signing up for what?
Well, all around the world, it is about talent.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the great reshuffle, I call it. And it's complex again, because it's always contextual. Mary's right when she says that there are a lot of people leaving the workforce. And unfortunately, it's disproportionately women who are leaving the workforce right now. When you look at the statistics, somewhere, depending on what day the survey's taken, somewhere in the range of 45 to 50% of all employees are thinking about making a change within 12 months.
70%, did you say?
I said somewhere between 40 and 50%.
40 and 50. Okay.
Yeah. That's a
still a
huge number. It's unprecedented in the era of collecting that kind of data. And it's for a variety of reasons. Sometimes it's because they realize, I don't like where I work, I don't like my boss, or I don't like something about the culture. Sometimes it's because the pandemic made them take another look at what they want their life to count for. Sometimes it's because of changing family situations, as Mary mentioned earlier. It's a lot of different reasons, but I believe that it creates both tremendous stress on leaders, and it also creates tremendous opportunities. If you're one of these people who is a leader, who leads from character and who leads from a desire to be conscious in the way that you build your business, this is actually a wonderful time. There's never been a better time for innovating the way that we interact with people. Never been a better time for innovating what the workplace looks like and how it operates. There are wonderful opportunities that didn't exist before the pandemic. And in spite of the terrific suffering that so many people have gone through that I don't want in any way to diminish, the other side of that is that it unleashed a level of creativity that has new things coming out every day right now that were triggered by the changing environment that we're in.
I have another deep question. Are you ready for this? Okay. Ron, you went first last time. I'm going to make you go first again. Mary is coming to you as well. So we're talking about the great resignation, the great reshuffle, if you will. That sounds a little more
optimistic.
It does.
Yeah.
It does. Then we also hear about so many positions are going unfilled, where employers cannot fill positions. The first part to that question is there any crossover there? Or are we talking about two completely different employee groups, populations? The second part to that question, and this may be more for Mary, is what is the world of human resources doing or innovating or bringing to that hiring dearth, if you will, to help fill that gap? So first of all, are those populations, are those audiences, those cohorts, are they connected? Or are they two totally different cohorts? And secondly, what are we doing to address those gaps?
Yeah, first, I think they are connected, although I'm not sure that I've thought through all the different ways that they're connected. So I'm going to plead a little bit of ignorance there. But I'm convinced that that's true because of clients that I talk to who are experiencing both sides of that at the same time. I think that what this is doing is it's bringing into fruition what we've been saying about HR for decades now, that they belong at the executive table, that we need to pay attention to what they're saying. And I think that a lot of business leaders have sort of given lip service to that, but now it's become mission critical to their success. Now they really do have to have people who understand the people issues at a deeper level. As Mary said, understand how people connect to process. We've explored this quite a bit, and we've discovered, for instance, in our innovation practice, that if we understand different ways that people innovate and how they fit in the continuum, and we organize them according to their talent, their skills, and their passion, all of a sudden the innovation initiatives gain great success. So we actually, using the reports that we get from TTI Success Insights, we measure people's innovation fitness in 6 different stages of innovation. And this is really something this is an example of how HR is becoming much more strategic and earning respect. And now executives are saying, hey, I want that for my group. I want that for my company. We've just finished a book on strategy that's coming out in January of this next year. It's an Inc. original imprint. And we're going to have 7 stages of the development and optimization of strategy. And once again, we've identified that it's different kinds of talent, skills, and passion at each of those 7 stages. So when you know your people at a deeper way than you have before, and you organize them according to the insights you're gaining, This is a tremendous advance in the way that we think about talent, the way that we think about human resources that really has not been practiced at this level ever before.
So HR departments typically are not at the executive table is kind of what we're assuming based on what you just shared. And I've seen that anecdotally myself.
And sometimes, Sarah, they're at the table, but they aren't listened to at the same level that the CFO is, or the chief sales officer, or marketing officer is. Right. It's not just about being at the table; it's about the respect that you deserve at that table.
It's also about the skill set of the human resource department and the folks who are leading and running it. There was a time where human resources is where you went to get your pay calculated, where you went to get benefits, and where someone wrote you up if you were the bad kid for the day. And that's not what human resources. That's not their role. It's incredibly tactical. There was an international bank 10 years ago that took payroll and benefits out of HR and said this has nothing to do with building organizational capabilities. Payroll and benefits are going to operations, and you folks are going to build organizational capability, and that's your goal. So, yes, more and more HR folks are being looked to help them solve this. And it is a bit of a reshuffle, and all of those reasons that you gave for people leaving, whether it's family issues, taking a good hard look at, what's important to you, what is my purpose. And there are still some folks who are hesitant to go back out into the world, just purely for health reasons. Right now, human resource people, I feel for them because they're dealing with some incredible issues around when you have employees dying, when you have people who are left behind, and how do you help and support those? But the good news is that employers have realized that we're not going to do business the way that we did before. There is this whole human capability. The population in the world is declining. The workforce is declining, and we need to make sure that we've given everyone an opportunity who wants an opportunity to work. So, or you could be as simplistic as my husband, who said, you just need to pay people fairly and stop being a jerk. So
that's a pretty simple equation there too.
Yes, and there's a fair amount of truth to that too as well.
Well, and I'd like to think that employers and employees, we have all become much more conscious over this past 18 months or so. Even though we recognize what it's taken to get here, I would like to think that is something that we're all taking forward. So, and drilling it down to that, just be a nice person. Go back to what you were taught in kindergarten.
Mm-hmm.
There is great research for that, Sarah, that the level of empathy for its chief executives and for C-suite people has grown a lot during this last 18 months because they quickly realized they had to pay attention to what was going on personally in people's lives. They had to make accommodations. So that's been a positive thing that's come out of it. Unfortunately, we're now dealing with a lot of fatigue across organizations that still haven't been able to return to some kind of normalcy, whatever that is that we define today. So we're running into, I just did a presentation at a leadership summit in Southern California on the executives avoiding burnout. We're running into a lot of people who thought they could hang in there and they had a certain amount of resilience. And there are people that are going through some mental health issues right now. Matter of fact, 96%, according to a Wall Street Journal article, 96% of entrepreneurs are expressing that they're under severe stress right now. And chief executive, C-suite leaders are experiencing depression at a rate 4 times the average in the United States. So we're not out of the woods yet. We're getting sort of the tail of all of the disruption that's taken place. And I always remind people that the leaders in your organization are also human beings. They also have needs, and they need to know that they're cared for And the more we all care for each other, regardless of position, the more success we're going to have.
Very well said. The other dynamic, it's terrifying, by the way, that stat of depression and stress and anxiety, especially when you consider that that's one of the biggest failings you could do for your immune system is to be chronically stressed. And so in a time of pandemic, that's the exact opposite of what we need to advance. Mm-hmm. Ron, when you were mentioning, talent is where everybody's talking about right now, creating your environments that will retain who you got and attract the new players. The other thing that's hatched out of landscape the last 2 years is the whole mobile workforce. And, you talk about working with organizations overseas. You're competing not just for the talent or competing against local U.S.-bred organizations. You're competing against, the lifestyle of open your laptop on the beach. As long as your work's getting done, we're okay. And so I find that to be so challenging, yet so opportunistic for organizations that are leaning into that and understanding like, okay, this isn't a pandemic scenario. We've kind of changed some of our perspective on, you really don't have to be here Monday through Friday, huddled with the team to be effective. And so how is that manifesting in what you're bringing to market and the conversations you're hearing and results that are being posted?
Well, rather than point out some of the difficult ways people are responding to it, we focus on the concept of everybody thinking about working where you're needed. And that means a lot of things. About 75% of the U.S. workforce now wants to be in a hybrid kind of situation. Mm-hmm. It's very few people that want to work at the office all the time and very few people that want to work at home all the time. So what we're really going to have to do, because I'm going to be a little bit philosophical here toward the end of our conversation, but I firmly believe, and I've spent years reflecting on this, I firmly believe that one individual is infinitely more valuable than any organization.
Okay.
And yet, the organization doesn't exist to serve one individual. The organization exists to serve all of its stakeholders. And that's a little bit of a dance. And sometimes it's jazz. Jazz is dissonant chords. Sometimes you got to learn how to make music when people don't all have their interests lined up in harmony. And this is part of what's so wonderful about leading an organization is the opportunity you have to keep growing by helping create that music of the individual with the organization in a way that everybody ends up happy at the end.
I like that a lot. We're kind of running into the end of the time lot here already. It always goes by so quickly. Mary, was there any topics that we didn't dig in deeply enough or didn't even get around to that you wanted to throw out on the waves here while we still have people's attention?
We got jazz in there.
We got jazz. That's right.
That was well done.
Here's your chance to, have an argument. Maybe pick a different kind of music that you identify with better.
No, Ron and I.
You both love jazz. I know.
Okay, of course.
Yes,
of course.
And we're both pretty in tune to the whole people piece and leadership, and how it's shifting and how it's changing, and there's reasons to be optimistic that we will see the way we work change. It's accelerating at a rate that we've not seen in the past. And that may be a good thing, but there will be some hiccups. But I feel incredibly hopeful that folks who in the past may not have been top choices or top candidates or looked at favorably as the next candidate, that we're looking at the whole person and the ability to learn, even though they may not have those skills, and will solve some of these problems. AI will solve some of the other problems around not being having enough bodies and people in order to perform duties and functions. And I'm also incredibly optimistic that we will see more and more companies formed and created to solve social problems as opposed to making stuff.
I hope you're right about that.
Me too.
If anybody's interested in connecting with you or the Talent Co-op, what's the best way to connect?
You can find us on most social media platforms. You can find me at Mary at aztalentcoopllc.com. you can find us on our website, and you'll usually find us out and about in the community somewhere, so we're not so difficult to find.
Well, awesome. We'll keep a watch for that. Ron, same to you. Is there anything that we didn't get to delve into that you wanted to share in our parting moments here?
We have a couple more hours, right?
Yeah, dig in. No problem.
No, I've enjoyed the conversation a lot. It's great to meet all of you and to hear so much common interest between Mary and me. It's been a wonderful conversation.
That's awesome. We sure appreciate being part of it. And if any listeners are looking to get in contact with Price Associates, best way to connect with you?
They can go to Ron at price-associates.com. Ron at price-associates.com. And actually, because I was pinch hitting today, it might even be more valuable if they go to ttisuccessinsights.com, because that's what Mary and I share in common. It's a company that we feel is doing a tremendous job of pioneering a lot of these topics for people around the world.
That's outstanding. Thanks for sharing that. Okay, so any parting thoughts from you, Debbie? Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. It was a great experience. It was lovely to meet you, Mary. And Ron, you were the surprise of the day, and you worked in jazz. And
delighted us all, right?
Yes,
Perfect.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me,
Yeah,
Jeremy.
Thanks for being here. Real quickly, we do have an event this Wednesday. We are co-hosting with Local First Arizona, Leadership Through the Pandemic. It is actually right here at the Max 6 offices in Tempe, 11:30 to 1. If anybody's able to join, it's also virtual. You can be here in the flesh or virtual, our first hybrid event. Pretty exciting. We will also do one of those on December 1st, a new tradition that has come along. It'll be December 1st, 5:30 to 7 p.m., the gifts you give and receive. Everybody kind of shows up with some tales of wisdom and books of inspiration, stories, anything to just share with our colleagues on the journey of leading a conscious practice. So with all that can be found registration, ccarizona.org. Thank you, everybody, for spending some time with us. Wish you all the best.
Thank you for listening to People in Profit, where we showcase the businesses that are elevating humanity through their work, right here in Arizona. Learn more about us at ccarizona.org.